So I typically only build what I need. However, my neighbors have been wanting to build a chicken coop. And believe it or not, a chicken coop is the most requested thing I get asked to build. So I asked if I could build it for them instead. So stand by as I build a 20-foot by 8-foot chicken coop. Of course, with plenty of supervisors on hand.
A lot of chicken coops are placed on skids. However, my neighbors requested to have the post actually set into the ground. To make this job go a little bit easier, I went ahead and used my tractor with an auger bit on the back to drill out all the holes. And I tell you what, these were the easiest holes I've ever dug. I am loving my tractor. Next, I mixed some concrete in a wheelbarrow and started setting the post. After getting the first one, I pulled a few string lines to make sure that I was lining these up good and straight. And then, of course, also making sure that they were level in both directions before letting them all set up overnight. The next day, I moved on to framing. And instead of utilizing my scrap OSB board on sawhorses, I'm going to be utilizing this portable miter saw stand that also doubles as a workbench. It not only has collapsible wings that fold up, but it also has a flip-top feature on it so you can attach a miter saw to one side, but then flip it around and have a clean work surface to utilize. Big thank you to Portamate for not only sponsoring this video, but also supporting my channel. Started off the framing by framing out what will be the coop portion of the chicken coop. Even though my neighbors primarily let their chickens free range, they wanted a chicken coop that had a coop portion for the chickens as well as a run portion. So that if they ever do need to keep the chickens cooped up, then there's enough space for all 27 of them. So this side over here, in between the 4 posts, is going to be the actual coop portion. I started off by framing the bottom and then working my way up. As you can see here, the ground is very unlevel. So instead of taking measurements as my reference for where all of these framing members needed to be placed, I instead would set one, make sure that it was level, then use a speed square to transfer either the top or bottom mark around the post to set the next board. But even taking that route, I would still throw a level on the board before sticking it in place. And you can see that with the ground being so unlevel around here, it was really difficult to get a ladder sitting still. So I relied heavily on standing on the frame that I was building as I was working my way up the coop. I cut all 4 of my posts to their final height using my circular saw and then continued on with the framing. Ultimately, what will go over here is 2 sliding windows. Now, of course, you can buy real windows. However, my neighbors were totally fine with me just making some wooden rails and making my own windows. My neighbor is actually a woodworker himself and was kind enough to let me use his shop. So instead of pulling out a job site saw, I went and used his saw in order to cut these parts before throwing them on the coop. And I ran out of time in this video, but you'll see the windows that I make and install in the next part. To give the walls of the run portion some stability and support, I wanted to add some 4-inch thick pavers. However, again, with the ground being unlevel, I first had to build up where these pavers would be sitting. And you'll see that I pulled a string line just to give me a visual reference on how tall I needed to build up these pavers. After repeating the process with the second paver, I then moved forward with framing out the wall. It was at this point that my neighbors got home from work and decided to get in on some of the action. It's always beneficial to have a helping hand, but if you're working by yourself, a really good tip to keep in mind is that you can set a clamp in place so that you have something to rest a board on while you go over to the other side and stick it in place. After getting the bottom and top sills in their respected places, I then moved on to cutting all of my studs to length so that I could put them in place. And while Jill helped me frame out this wall, Rick was very kind enough to build up the location for that final paver.
Another wall. Good job. Woo, Chica.
And don't worry about the bottom plate of the coop being up so tall. All of this area gets backfilled so that dirt is brought in to the level of this bottom plate. And then later I'll add in a predator apron in order to keep animals from digging under the coop. Alright, going back to the coop portion, my neighbors really wanted to have a giant drawer that spans the bottom of the chicken coop that will serve as a waste catch. It's essentially just a big poop box. It'll be full of shred, and the purpose of it being a drawer is so that it can be pulled out and easily cleaned. However, the space is so large that I ended up dividing it right down the middle and making 2 separate drawers. And even doing it this way, they still came out to be massive. But I'll show you those in a few minutes. After getting that center divider in place, I ripped down some plywood so that I could deck this portion and easily stand on it.
Woo! Watch my fingers.
Watch fingers.
Before making the drawers, though, I decided to make the nesting boxes, which is going to be the individual spaces that the chickens can go to lay their eggs. I once again used Rick's shop so that I can make quick work of making these boxes. And this is essentially just a big rectangle with some dividers in it. After assembling it in the shop, I then moved it out to the coop and stuck it in place. Now you could be smart and use some clamps to hold it, or you can sit very awkwardly and just use your knee to kind of prop it up while you then drive in a screw.
Yeah.
Whatever works. And since I have so many chickens, I not only made the nesting boxes for the left, but also a set to go along the right. Alrighty, now I moved on to those massive drawers I was mentioning earlier. My neighbors specifically requested that these drawers be made deep because apparently if you have more than 4 inches of shred, then you can get away with stirring it around every once in a while and then only having to completely change it out once a year. So the idea with the drawers is that it will be at the bottom of the coop to capture the poop, rhymes. Then later I will make an access hatch that my neighbors can pull out the drawers, stir around the shred and shove them back in. And then once a year, completely remove the drawer in order to empty out the shred and replace it. After getting the drawers made, I then moved on to making some roosting bars. Apparently, chickens like to sleep perched up on something and preferably up high. And that's where these roosting bars come into play. The outside frame is made just from some 2x4s, which I then clamped together and used a Forstner bit to drill holes into. I started off with about 1 1/8 inch diameter. However, I was told very quickly from my Instagram followers that this diameter is way too small for chicken feet. So I later upgraded these to 2-inch diameter dowels. While I did get a lot done, I still have plenty to go. So stay tuned for the next video where I make the railing system for those 2 drawers, the sliding windows, as well as the roof and siding.
I'm going to stop there for part 1, but in part 2, I'm going to continue building on this giant chicken coop. I hope that you've enjoyed the process so far, and stay tuned if you're interested in seeing it complete. I'm not coordinated as a framer yet.